Well, that's the best presentation I've ever had to follow, so this is going to be really difficult. So what can I say? What can I say? Okay, so this is a flash talk, so it's supposed to be really fast. So affective impression of groups versus individuals in interaction. So about a month ago, I received a grant, a small grant from the University of Missouri system. And if you've received a grant, you feel very excited at first, and then after a couple days, you're like, now I got to do all this stuff that I said, and you feel a bit overwhelmed. And so I wanted to see what affect control theory would say about how I felt. So I want to put in university rewards professor or grant panel financially backed professor. But I couldn't, because you can't simulate groups in affect control theory, which proves the need for the research that I'm doing. So what I am suggesting is to answer two research questions about groups as agents, as actors, not necessarily actors in the first position, but actors as in identified entities that are doing or receiving action. So do group actors and individual actors produce the same affective impressions in interactions? And do group actors in interaction produce the same affective impressions as their individual members? So if a group does something, how does that relate to the individual members and their affect? And I was interested in different sort of things that could sort of affect this. So how are groups really different than individuals? Why wouldn't groups work? And I found a couple of terms in the group dynamics, group processes literature that I thought might be interesting. But if you have some more, this is, as I said, I just started this, so I'm very interested. So one is group entitativity, which is to what degree groups are perceived as a unified entity. So Lickel did a big study that's become quite famous. It's about 30 years old now, and colleagues. And they looked at whether we perceive different collectives, different groups, different organizations as a cohesive group, or if it's just more of a scattering. How groupy is the group? Another one is group mind, which has been gaining a lot of traction recently after an article on perceptions of mind in Science about 10 years ago. And a few people have been applying that to group, that people actually perceive different levels of mind, meaning the intentionality, thinking, and planning. And so I'm interested in whether this affects groups as well. And specifically, they have two dimensions which I thought were really interesting. One is an agentic mind, the ability to act, which could correspond to actors in ACT, and an experiential, they call patiency mind, which may correspond to objects. That is, have you experienced something? Did something happen to you? And so it seemed to me that these two terms might be sort of interesting terms to see if they affect whether groups can be applied in ACT. My plan is this: to first study out of context, find groups with EPA that are in all octants. You might see I'm sort of going by the same plan that I did with the products, that Rowan and I did with the products research, and base it on some group studies and the ACT studies that have included groups. And there are a few, most of them haven't approached it from a group perspective as groups as actors, but there's been several that have included group ratings. And then study two would be an in-context sort of study where I'd be looking at affective impression change, whether EPA should be increasing, each one should be increasing or decreasing for that group as an actor by whether the group is the actor or the object versus entitativity and group mind, to see if those are actually make a difference in whether those equations work. And then I would be measuring group EPA, group members EPA, entitativity, and mind. So as I said, just got this a few months ago, hired some research assistants, so we've already come up with some questions, so I thought I'd have one slide, my last slide for that. So this is something that I don't know, and I don't know if there's a definitive paper in ACT about it. So does a group term need to be an identity or modifier? And I know we haven't talked about groups in ACT a whole lot, and so that's why this maybe hasn't come up. Basically, are Italians, Italian, and Italian, the Italians, all Italians, Italians people, group of Italians, Italians group, all going to be rated the same by people? And could that be qualified as a group as opposed to a modifier? You know, an Italian doctor or an identity, I'm an Italian. So that's one question. And then the other question I had that's sort of come up that I've been thinking about is, does the nature of interaction as specified by the ACT syntax make a group or an entitative group out of a potentially loose collectives or social categories? So here's the example here. You have a queue of people. which would generally be called a collective in groups literature. Meaning it's just people that happen to be in the same place at the same time. And the question is, that might not seem like a group, and it might be very hard to rate. But when you put it into a sentence, into a context where it's the object or the actor, does that somehow change it and make it more of a stable entity? So a police officer reprimanded a queue of people, then the action is being taken towards that entire collective, and therefore it may be a group. So that's what I'm thinking about. Another with Italians again, the Italians assisted the injured. When you're talking about Italians, that's a very broad social category, defined as a social category in groups literature. But when you say the Italians assisted the injured, then are you then thinking of a specific group, or are you thinking about all people in that social category? So these are two questions I'm sort of wrestling with right now and haven't thought about all that much. So I'd love to hear what you have to say about it. Thanks.